Hi, tonight I am joined by Professor Tim Specter, the author of the brilliant Diet Myth. We will be tackling subjects such as gut health, immunity, and of course, COVID, so do not miss out. For those of you who don't know who Tim Specter is, basically he is a brilliant professor at King's College London, and he heads a research group where he looks at genetics and he looks at the microbiome on our skin and in our gut, and he uses twins as a basis of his study, which makes obvious sense. But obviously twins have the same DNA but different microbiomes, so that makes a difference. Tim, how are you?
Marvellous.
Good evening, sir. First of all, I've just kind of introduced you to my followers. I think most of them know you anyway. I've been rabbiting on about your brilliant book, The Diet Myth, for a good couple of years now. It was a really entertaining read, but as I was reading it, I'd already lost a ton of weight, but as I was reading it, I was thinking, God, this is so much more civilized. I can have sourdough, I can have unpasteurized cheese, I can have kombucha. So basically, it really resonated with my lifestyle anyway. And, I must thank you for that, because everything is in one sort of like easy to read page turner. So I appreciate that. And if anyone is struggling with what diet to sort of navigate, have a look at Tim's book. You've got a new book coming out in summer as well, haven't you?
Yes, this one.
Spoon-fed. Fabulous.
It was supposed to come out today.
Oh.
But, of course, this little virus got the better of us. And with no bookshops open or anything, and no big events in Champagne easily accessible, it's been postponed till the end of the summer, towards the end of August. But you can order it as well online. So
I will be doing that.
If those who haven't got Diet Myth, this is like the follow-up to Diet Myth. So I've just dropped you there.
That's all right. Happens to me all the time, my friend. Trust me. Okay.
So that's all about Diet Myth. Is about diet myths, and this is about all the rubbish we've been told about food in general and the influence of the food industry and lots of other stuff, and all about personalised nutrition as well, which
fabulous.
The science that's come in the last couple of years.
Yeah, because you're going to rattle a few cages there, because obviously we've got the huge agricultural industry and all these big monsters, sort of like huge powerhouses that generally just sort of like filter information down to us for the old dollar bill, I guess, really. I got huge reaction from my followers, who are all clearly like obsessed with your research as I am. Do you mind if we whiz through a few questions, just basic questions, before we get onto COVID? Because obviously COVID is pretty much at the forefront of most people's minds, but a lot of us still have underlying issues that have not lifted just because we've all been on lockdown. Do you mind giving us a few of your ideas?
Okay, sure.
Following questions. First of all, can you just explain the reason that you use twins in your studies and how important that is?
Twins are the perfect natural experiment, basically. Things you can only otherwise do in with animals in cages and going to mate. So you basically take a group of identical twins who share all their genes, and you compare them to a group of non-identical twins who share half of their genes. And if they're more similar for something, if the identicals are more similar than the non-identicals, that tells you that has to be due to the fact they share all their genes, and everything else is adjusted for, because you've adjusted for the family, the environment, everything else. So it's basically a way of telling how much of anything is due to nature or nurture.
Interesting. And how many twins do you have in your study?
We have about 14,000 twins in the study, of which we sort of actively see about 8,000. And we see them about every 4 years or so, and they come in for a full medical. They're probably the best studied people in the planet. In terms of, we've spent about £40,000 per person on these twins over the last, been doing it for nearly 30 years now.
Incredible. And what sort of, I mean, it's a huge question, but what kind of conclusions are you generating from this? Is it more nature or is it more nurture? Which is more powerful, epigenetics or genetics?
It's a draw.
Oh, okay.
So people who want, though my previous book was all about genetics, which was identically different about what, but it's on average, everything is 50% genetic, if you have to ask, okay? So that's the average. So if you don't want to sound dumb at a dinner party, just say, oh, I think that's 50% genetic. You're pretty well bound to be right. But surprisingly, identical twins are often more different than people think, because although they look the same, they have the same traits, you know, they smile the same way, we think of them as the same. Inside, they're often very different. And that's what's quite exciting. And that's what's interested me for the last 10 years more than their similarities. And the fact that they usually die of different diseases, they die of different cancers, and medically they behave quite differently. I think that's really interesting because they're clones. They should really, you know, everything should happen exactly the same. But when one gets breast cancer, the other one's, you know, only got a 1 in 6 chance or something. It's really not that straightforward for most conditions and diseases, and that's really interesting. So that's what I've been studying the last 10 years is why, if the genes are the same, what makes people so different, what makes them all individual. And I think that theme is running through everything I'm doing now in terms of research, this individuality of people, which could be the epigenetic phenomenon, you know, just how you switch your genes on and off. But I think increasingly, I think the role of the gut is more important because that's even more different in identical twins. And our immune systems are different, and that, you know, comes into COVID and why we all respond differently to the same virus. So I think my sort of general overarching theme really is that everyone's a real individual, and that one size fits all advice doesn't work, whether it's for medical treatment, whether it's for diets, whether it's for food preferences, whether it's for exercise, or it's, you know, how to deal with a virus and how we respond to it. Everything, we've got to understand much more about ourselves so that we can actually personalize pretty much everything as we understand more about our body and why we're different to each other in these subtle ways.
So if you were to have because I'm really into testing and quantifying myself, and I like to sort of like take as much guesswork out of it as possible, just from a time perspective, would you recommend that people do have gut tests on a regular basis?
It depends what they want. I mean, I think everyone should have at least one gut test to see how healthy or unhealthy they are, because they are, at the moment, generally good to tell. Yeah, you can tell more about from a gut test than you can from their DNA about how healthy people are. And I think most people don't realize that. And many people think they're healthy, but actually they have very non-diverse gut microbes, and they can be surprised. And so definitely do it, see how far away you are from the average. But a lot of the claims of gut testing companies aren't matched by the science yet. And so we can't predict things like individual diseases and other specific treatments yet based on your gut health. But increasingly we will. And we've got a paper coming out in Nature Medicine soon from the PREDICT study, this large, the biggest nutritional study ever done, where we do look at the effect of the gut microbes on your response to certain foods. So we are able to predict to some level, depending on your microbes, whether you're going to process fats better or not. But it's still fairly early days. So I think everyone should get one test, see how it goes, but not read too much into it in terms of you need this yogurt or you need this probiotic or whatever. But definitely the results we're showing are that they are going to be useful in saying you're someone who digests fats well, you're someone who deals with carbs well. There's more general advice that's put in terms of a full nutritional profile. Is there any
specific company that you work with that we could be able to sort of get correlate our data with those papers, because obviously there's so many tests out there, people jumping onto the bandwagon. I don't want my followers to sort of like be directed in the wrong direction, because I want to have the latest papers that are kind of actionable, really. So which team would you recommend?
Well, most companies don't actually do research. They just copy other people's research and stick it into their paper. So they haven't tested their product on anybody. They just take a few highlights and say that's what they're doing. So the whole field is switching towards genetics, so full sequencing of the microbes, rather than what we've had up till now, which is just looking at one gene called the 16S gene. So for a snapshot, I think it's absolutely fine to take a company as a one-off that gives you a snapshot. And in the UK, there's a company called Atlas Bioscience that's, I think, gives a realistic snapshot of your gut microbes. I wouldn't necessarily trust its advice on your diet based on that, because, again, they don't do their own research. It's just guessing from other people's. But if you want to know whether you're healthy or not, that's a good one. It's fairly reliable. But I work with a company called Zoe, and they are starting in about a month's time to launch a product that combines the microbiome test with the nutritional package that is actually based on our trial and studies. And so I think that's the one I tend to trust, although I'm obviously conflicted because I've been working with them and a consultant on them. But that's there are only a handful of companies that do real research and publish in real journals. And we're having this big paper, as I said, coming out probably in a few weeks' time in Nature Medicine called the PREDICT study. And people can see this amazing difference between people, even identical twins, and how they respond to identical foods. And so we gave 1,000 people identical meals, and we saw basically 1,000 different metabolic responses to that same meal. And the idea is we can then predict in any one individual how you respond to a test meal, how you would then respond to your normal diet. And that I think is quite groundbreaking.
Fantastic. So congratulations.
But the next year or so is going to be learning more about it. I think we've got to agree that everyone's on a research curve here. I haven't got all the answers, but the more people do these tests in a systematic way, the more we can all learn about ourselves.
And I suppose if we did our test with Zoe, we would be able to contribute to the research in ourselves with our data, I'd imagine. It kind of helps. Yes. It helps, doesn't it? Okay, gets into something a little bit more specific. I've got a lot of sort of questions. Is it possible to have a link between the gut and allergies and asthma? Is that where it originates? Is the gut that influential?
The gut is crucial to our immune system. And without your gut microbes, you don't have a functioning immune system. So it's basically the way from the first few hours of birth that our immune system develops. And each microbe sends out chemicals that, in a way, tune our immune system to not be reacting too much and not too little. And all the studies of all the allergies show that people with allergies, whether it's food allergies or it's pollen or those other ones, have abnormal gut microbe profiles. And some of that is because of the allergy and the immune system is overreacting and therefore causes problems in your gut. And some of it is probably that your gut microbes are predisposing you to allergy as well. So we don't yet know how to sort of deal with that, but definitely the two are firmly linked, which means there's a clear link about why diet through your gut microbes is related to allergy, rather than just a direct route of that people assumed, oh, I'm allergic to strawberries. And that's why we see even people with celiac disease, identical twins, reacting differently to gluten because they have different gut microbes.
And can you explain how, say, C-section twins have different microbiomes because of when they were delivered. Is that really possible because they were handled on birth with like a different doctor or a maternity nurse or whichever? Is it that instantaneous? That's where you get your microbiome from, that immediate environment?
Yes, you're born with none, so you start life with nothing. And those first few hours are often quite crucial in which ones you get, whether it's from the way most mammals get it, from their mother's birth canal, the messy bits down there, which it's all designed for, and that's why the baby's face is facing the mucky end. That's how we all mainly populated. But if you're cesarean section, as a quarter of the world are now, then you basically get the microbes from the person that picks you up first, which is often the nurse, or skin microbes floating around. And the evidence is that isn't particularly good for you. It's not as good as getting the ones that nature intended. Although by 3 years, generally, there's not much difference between the microbes of cesarean babies and normal babies. But we think that 3 years can be crucial, and that's why cesarean section babies, like myself, for example, are slightly weaker on the immune system than they should be, and just slightly fatter as well.
Is that a fact? Wow. So if you've had a C-section baby, obviously there'd be a ton of mums out there going, oh my God, how do I sort of increase the diversity of my child's gut microbiome? Is it possible to manipulate a child's microbiome?
Yes, I mean, it makes a big difference if you breastfeed, which is the best way to get a good gut microbiome. And also, as soon as you are weaning, introducing a variety of foods as well makes a big difference, as well as having an outdoor rural environment, exposure to animals, a vast range of food. So it used to be thought that you protect kids from things like peanuts and this kind of stuff, and it seems the science is showing the opposite now, that mothers that introduce all kinds of foods early in small amounts seems to actually reduce the risk. So, I'm not a pediatric allergy expert, but what I've learned is that a lot of the stuff we were told in the past is no longer holding up. And, we need to start thinking of allergy in ways of how to build up our gut microbes rather than just trying to avoid anything that might trigger it off. Because the more you avoid things, the weaker your gut microbes and the immune system is. So, we need to get kids dirty again, used to dealing with things like our ancestors did.
Absolutely, I agree that, and that's actually happening in my house, whether I like it or not at the moment. My kids have gone feral. Okay, so now down to some serious gut issues. I've got a lot of questions about colitis and Crohn's disease. Do you have can you shed any light on how to tackle these? Because it seems to be, particularly with colitis, it's only steroids that seem to be offered. Is there any other, do you see any light on the horizon with these chronic conditions?
Well, a few of them have been shown to respond to poo transplants.
Yeah.
So for ulcerative colitis particularly, the evidence is quite good that if you can get hold of it or be in a trial of a fecal transplant, as they're called, fecal microbial transplant, it works nearly as well as most of the biologic treatments. And so biologic treatments tend to put about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people into remission and help another maybe half of people. So they're pretty good as opposed to just steroids. But fecal transplants do about the same. So they don't work in everybody, but there seems to be about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people they have a miraculous effect on. So manipulating the gut microbes clearly works in colitis. It doesn't work as well in the other form as Crohn's for some reason. We don't really understand why yet. But all of these suggests that manipulating the gut microbes in other ways with potentially other probiotics and prebiotics, altering the diet, can have major effects if you can find out what to do. But at the moment, opinions divided about exactly what the best thing is to do. So most people are probably best advised to just experiment at the moment.
I mean, I suppose that a lot of time people are told to do elimination diets, which are, of course, with a child can be so irritating and, stressful. And there's so many foods that can flare up a certain individual. And like you said, if identical twins can have a totally different reaction to, say, something like gluten, I mean, where's a mother to start, or where's a wife to start when you start trying to introduce different meals or try and put some sort of system in that you're not allowed to eat certain foods? It's a really tricky one, isn't it? And it's time consuming as well. There's my number 4 coming in. Can you explain to me why some doctors say that leaky gut does not exist? Because I get so much feedback that it actually does, and people are having flare-ups of their guts. Do you think it does exist?
It depends what you mean by leaky gut. I mean, it's used far too widely as some condition, and it isn't really, most gastroenterologists don't recognize it as a specific condition, because in a way, all our guts are leaky to some extent.
Yes.
And it's a question of degree. So I think it used to be a sort of general term to describe anything that doctors didn't understand, right. Which is common in medicine. And you always need a few of them to get rid of tricky patients, because people like to have a diagnosis. They say, "Oh well,
yeah, leaky gut sounds rather dramatic.
Leaky gut, off you go.
I'm leaking on the inside." So, we appeal.
So I think it doesn't really stand up on its own as a problem. I think it's part of the mechanism about why you get inflammation and colitis, and when the gut wall starts to get inflamed, it will start to be leaky. But the idea that everything causes leaky gut is more pseudoscience. So the thinking is going that you get these changes, and it's not quite sure which happens first, whether you might get a slight change in microbes, which cause a slight change in acidity or pH, and they cause a change in the amount of fluid going in and out of the gut, which again changes the acidity or the environment, which then changes and allows other microbes to grow. It's much more complex than just, oh, well, my gut's leaking, therefore I have to eliminate all foods. I think we've oversimplified this just to try and explain the unexplainable. And what's clear from my understanding of people with things like IBS is that it isn't easy to define. Everyone's got their own version of it. And the heart of it generally is that the gut microbes are doing things they shouldn't be doing in that state, or they don't like the food they're being given, or there's some mismatch going on. But it's oversimplistic to call everything leaky gut. I think it's much more important we move away from these things like, talk of toxicity, talk of, purging yourself. It's all part of that old-fashioned mythology that I think we need to get rid of from our discussions and start talking about, not about eliminating things and cleaning your gut, but actually how do you get more diversity by eating a greater range of foods that are generally healthy? Because the key is to build up as many different types of microbes as you can, which gives you flexibility. And once you've got flexibility, you can cope with a bit of leakiness. You can cope with a little bit of, immune stimulation. You can cope with a bit of a tummy bug. That's what it's all about. It's all about flexibility. And to do that, you need a range of foods. You don't want to be always excluding foods. And that's a bit of a vicious circle, because the less foods you eat, the less diverse your gut microbes are, the more you weaken your system.
So what is your average day? Say if you were enjoying a day in sunny Spain, what would your average food diary look like? Just to give us an idea.
Oh, you're making me very longing to be in Spain at the moment. I would I get up early and go for a swim in the sea for about an hour when no one's around, and then I would come back, have a meditate on the terrace, dry out, and have a breakfast, which would probably be yogurt and fruit with some kefir, and a black coffee.
Yeah.
And at lunchtime, I would have a salad or some cold roast vegetables that I'd had from overnight. Probably with, depending on whether I'm working, with a glass of kombucha or a beer. And in the evening, I'd have a larger meal. I tend not to have many snacks these days, so I'd eat fairly late, 9 o'clock Spanish time, and I generally have a plant-based diet. I will have some fish when I'm in Spain, and I tend to have meat only maybe once a month.
Okay.
And I try and have 30 different types of plant.
Do you prepare your plants in a specific way? Because I find sometimes I can get a bit bloated if I go on one of my kale runs. And so if I eat raw as well, I find that I can get a little bit bloated. I mean, you mentioned about ancestral sort of harping back into the olden days. And I know sometimes soaking vegetables can help, or like you mentioned, overnight cooking or whatever. Do you find you have to prepare your plants in advance?
Well, I don't go on kale binges. So
you're talking to an addict here. I'll do anything over the top.
Because
kale.
I'm more of, if I do it, I'd be in a smoothie with 10 other things.
Right.
So I tend to go for variety rather than anything, I don't believe in having a favorite veg or fruit. And the nice thing about being in Spain is you've got incredible variety pretty much most of the year round. So you can be picky. With my fruit, I'll always have berries, seeds, nuts added to it. I add nuts and bits of cheese to my salads. And I would always have about 5 or 6 things that I'd be eating rather than just one. So I've never had that problem of too much of one thing, apart from maybe Jerusalem artichokes. Which known as artichokes, which most people recognise. So you have to go easy on them.
Yes.
But in general, variety is how I deal with it. And I generally like my vegetables steamed or roasted. I'm not into much raw food because I think it's generally more nutritious to very lightly steam things first, and I get more flavour out of it. Is my way of doing it. But I'm always looking for variety, and so the more things I can put into a dish easily, that's generally what I go for. And I make sure I always get plenty of my polyphenols with red wine and dark chocolate and my coffee, as well as plenty of extra virgin olive oil, good quality stuff.
Superb. Okay, right. So what I'd like to move on to now, obviously you've got a very diverse microbiome. How confident are you that your immune system can take on the beast that is COVID-19?
Well, it's already tried, so I've already had it.
So, okay, interesting. And how did you respond?
I had a mild dose, so I was so I got about when most people got it. I got the end of March in London when about 10% of the population were affected with it. I had no traditional symptoms. I just had I was tired and I lost interest in food, slightly lost my taste. I lost about 3 kilos, and I had a strange cough for 1 hour in the evening at about 8 o'clock, and I was short of breath, which lasted about 3 weeks. And I did get tested, and I had very low levels of virus, and I slowly recovered. But so I was relatively lucky. And I guess my immune system, did a decent job of protecting myself. But I didn't produce many antibodies, interestingly. So only intermediate when I've tested my antibodies recently.
Okay, so do you fear that you could probably get another dose of it then if you've not got that many antibodies?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I possibly could, but I'm not too worried about it because I think I dealt with it okay. It wasn't pleasant, but much better than a lot of people.
Can you tell me, because I noticed an article in The Guardian that you mentioned that obviously the government are telling us to look out for a temperature and a cough, and that's kind of it. So you just mentioned lack of taste, lack of smell. What are the symptoms do you think we should be looking out for? Because obviously, clearly, there must be thousands of people who are just generally going on under the radar, but the government aren't acknowledging who've had this disease.
Yes. So we had a paper in Nature published yesterday, which was looked at 2.5 million people's symptoms. So about 6 weeks ago, we set up the world's largest citizen science project. Some of your listeners might have heard of it, the COVID symptom tracker app study.
Yeah, my father-in-law's doing it. He loves filling that in,
So it, through social media, went absolutely viral. So within 24 hours, we had 1 million people downloaded the app. And we've now got 3.2 million people in the UK alone using it, and millions logging. So anyone do join. It's called, if you go to the website, covid.joinzoe.com.
I've actually got a link in my my bio, so you can go there, because what I wanted to specifically say to my followers is basically you're asking women to do it as well. For some reason, women don't seem to have the ferocity that men are suffering with this virus. I mean, for once, does being a woman actually help us? Is it in our estrogen levels? And why are children not getting it? Is it the melatonin? Have you got any light on this that you might be able to shed?
Well, we think it could be estrogens that are helping women because they seem to get the virus just like men, the same amount of mild symptoms, but they don't get the severe complications. So that's why we just started a research project. So we're asking all the women to actually tell us about their hormone treatments, contraception, HRT, etc. And we're going to analyze that this week and see if we can get the answer. So this whole thing is like a giant research project, and that's what's really exciting. You can do a whole project on, 2 million women in a week and get the result. It's really sort of changing the way science is being done.
And are there any other sort of telltale signs, like, for example, I think diabetes has been mentioned, obesity has been mentioned, that it's going to make you more susceptible to have a bad reaction from COVID?
Definitely. So, yeah, being overweight, having bad gut health, being in a deprived area, which suggests you're having bad diets, you can't afford to have good food. All of these things are pointing towards the gut as being crucial for this. That no one's done any good studies yet on the gut microbiome and COVID, but everything is pointing in that direction. And that would also explain why you get this huge range of symptoms. You can give everyone the same virus and you get like 50 different types of reaction, just like if you give someone the same food, the same piece of bread, you'll get 50 times of reaction. So I think we're going to find out in the future that the gut is pretty crucial for this, and that to protect yourself as much as possible, as well as doing the usual stuff, if you can have a more diverse gut microbiome, eat well, have fermented foods, do everything I talk about in the diet myth, you're going to definitely improve your chances, and that's going to be a really big thing in the future.
Fascinating stuff. I mean, I take things like Simprove, because just from the fact I get into a habit of just cooking the same thing and getting on the old, just churning out the same food all the time, and I give it to the kids as well, just to try to get more into them, really. But you're right. I think I need to start, eating the rainbow, as you say, you know. And I do have unpasteurized cheese. We're lucky. We're here in Spain. We just got some really nice cabra. So we had some really nice goat's cheese, which, you know, I gave the kids. And we've got sourdough as well, which I was so delighted that I found in the supermarket here, because I miss that. I digest it better. I don't get as bloated. But is there anything else you can give some people who might be struggling with their weight right now, how to not only just protect themselves a little bit more? What sort of diet shifts should they make if they are overweight, pre-diabetic, or even diabetic, and they've obviously got the fear factor of COVID knocking around?
Well, at the moment, I mean, the evidence is that eat as diversely as possible. Try and aim for 30 different types of plant a week. That includes nuts and seeds.
Right.
And herbs and spices, so it's all good for you. Have some fermented food every day, and don't forget kimchi, sauerkraut, easy to make, as well as your and take look at intermittent fasting and restricted time eating, because the gut microbes actually like having a rest.
Yeah,
they don't like people who snack all the time.
Yeah.
And so skip breakfast, or if you prefer your breakfast, have your evening meal really early. So try and leave at least once or twice a week, a 14-hour period where you're not eating. I think that's a really helpful extra tip without having to dramatically change your diet. So there are lots of things you can do just by thinking about, am I eating for my gut microbes?
Yeah.
Rather than worrying about calories, which are generally nonsense.
Yeah. More about chemicals. For me, I count chemicals, not calories. And the amount of calories I put away is ridiculous, because I eat so much oil, you know, and a lot of fats. I really enjoy them, you know. I do a lot of running as well. So I thrive on fat, even though genetically, I'm not very good at metabolizing it. But I'm going to do your test and find out what my gut says about that, actually. You know, it's super interesting for me.
So everyone should experiment. I think that's the key. And that's what I talk about in Spoon-Fed, which is this whole idea of, you know, while we're waiting for these tests, and they know it'll be available, you know, to everybody, and they will cost money, people can experiment themselves by doing things like, what's it like if I skip breakfast for a week? What's it like if I, change things around and I change my hours I'm eating? What if I, try and eat 30 things rather than 10 things a week? Go for something you wouldn't have on your menu normally. You know, try and get out of these ruts. And, you know, rather than having food supplements, just, you know, say, what can I eat that's going to give me everything I need so I don't have to go that route? They're some of the basic things. They sound simple, but we've been so brainwashed by marketing about calorie-free or fat-free or all this kind of nonsense that we forget it's all about eating real food, you know, forgetting ultra-processed foods and getting back to where we were.
I completely agree. And making it a bit more fun. I mean, I love looking at like a paleo diet and just rolling the clock right back to say even what my great grandmother was doing. She certainly wasn't microwaving stuff, you know. So, Tim, I really want to thank you for coming on. I really want to persuade all my followers to go to my bio and link into your new study. And I think like 10 of you were going to get a signed copy of Tim's new book. I'm not sure when I can get it to you, but I'd really like to say thank you so much. Good luck with the book. And I raise a glass of kombucha in your honor, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. And it's been lovely speaking to you all. And do go and log on. If you're in the UK, log on and tell us about your COVID symptoms. And we're also doing some crowdfunding there. So we need to see some money there to carry on the good research. But lovely meeting you all, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you. Take care. Love to everyone at King's. Bye-bye.